Welcome back to History Exam Helper, where I show you how to write essays. In today's lesson, we'll write a context paragraph on the Roman Republic. Here's the essay question, and here is the paragraph pyramid that we'll be using throughout. The topic sentence of a context paragraph introduces the main idea, which is to state the purpose of the context paragraph. Specifically, the context paragraph provides background information that helps us understand why things happened the way they did. And this information includes things like origins, time and place, political systems, economic conditions, and social norms. Without context, we are more likely to make assumptions about cause and effect, which means we don't get to understand the full picture of history. Therefore, in the topic sentence, we can state plainly that context is important before diving into the essay question. But we don't need to be too specific because the next part of the paragraph pyramid will be more specific. The explanation sentence explains the purpose of the context paragraph in more detail. We noted in the last section that political, economic, social, and even chronological and geographical context helps us understand why history unfolded the way that it did. But as historians, we need to choose the most important types of contextual factors. And most of the time, these broad types, like politics or geography, cover a range of specific information that we will discuss later on. Therefore, in the explanation sentence, we can state that politics and geography are the more important contextual factors that help us understand the Republic. But again, we don't need to be too specific because we'll use detailed evidence to support the explanation in the next section. Next, the evidence section uses primary and secondary sources to support the explanation. Specifically, primary sources provide first-hand descriptions of the contextual factors listed in the explanation, and secondary sources take a wider perspective and compare sources for accuracy, and they also debate cause and effect. In this example, there isn't any comprehensive first-hand evidence of what happened at the start of the Republic, so we have to use semi-primary sources like Livy and Cicero, who describe the early beginnings of the Republic years and years after the events occurred. Next, we use secondary sources from modern historians who provide alternate views to the standard narrative. Therefore, in the evidence section, we can state that the available primary sources use a common narrative used in ancient times to explain major political transitions, while modern historians highlight the geopolitical location of Rome and the influence of Etruria. Now, these conflicting views are very important when talking about the Roman Republic, but we don't need to discuss this here in this section because the next section is where we analyze the evidence. So we analyze the evidence to see beyond the obvious and reach a deeper meaning. Specifically, on one hand, it is obvious here that there are two narratives, or even more, regarding the contextual factors that influence the beginnings of the Roman Republic that we listed in the evidence section. But when we look deeper, we can see how history is a creative process based on available sources that have real, tangible consequences. For example, as we mentioned, the ancient sources recreated the Republic's beginnings from afar, using limited and biased accounts from previous writers. As a result, they highlighted the ideological hatred of kingship, which was a quintessential and very real reality for later Romans like Livy and Cicero. But when we look at modern historians, they give us a much more sober option that focuses on the quite standard geopolitical interaction between Rome and Etruria. Now, this is important because although we don't know which version is actually true, the version of history we accept changes history itself. If we accept the standard version, then most Roman actions from the beginnings of the Republic up to the Empire make a lot of sense, as they sought to squash monarchical tendencies from their people and government. But if we accept the modern version, then we must question the motivations of the early Republican Romans and question those who wrote about it. Now, this tension doesn't remove the importance of the ancient semi-legend of the Republic's origins. Instead, it reveals an important tension in historical thinking. Even if the legend was completely made up, it still had an enormous effect on later Romans, something we'll get into later in this essay series. Finally, we get to the prize of the paragraph pyramid, which is the link sentence that links back to the main idea of the paragraph. Specifically, the main idea is in the topic sentence, where we stated that it is important to talk about contextual features before discussing historical significance. And in the following sentences, we used explanations, evidence, and analysis to support this idea. Therefore, in the link sentence, we can state with some confidence that exploring contextual features is important before discussing historical significance. And now we have a finished paragraph. Now this paragraph is not comprehensive. Advanced students should provide more evidence and more specific sources. And next time we will write our next paragraph on the Roman Republic and political institutions. See you then.